Welcome to part 3 of Rethinking Resi. I'm Isabel Allen, editor of Architecture Today and your chair for this conference. Let's have a look at what's coming up in part 3. Emma Cariaga from British Land is going to tell us about plans to create a new, sustainable, mixed-use town centre at Canada Water and the measures that are being taken to ensure that new and existing residents live healthy, happy lives. Ben Hancock from Oscar Acoustics will explore some of the problems caused by poor soundproofing and give some pointers as to how to minimise noise transfer between homes. Flora Samuel from the University of Reading is going to discuss the importance of using data to understand and improve the relationship between the built environment and health and well-being, and give us an overview of policy, guidance and research relating to social value and quality of life. Patrick Michelle from Platform 5 Architects will present a case study on the Toynbee Hall redevelopment in London's Spitalfields as an example of a charity partnering with a private developer to deliver a master plan that reflects its mission to help local people shape a happier and more equitable future. So let's kick off part 3, Health, Safety and Wellbeing. And I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Emma Cariaga, who leads the Canada Water project at British Land.
Thank you. And hello, everybody. I am delighted to come and talk to you today, and especially on the topic of health and well-being. And I think the perfect place to root that discussion is in a development which I have the privilege of leading, which is called Canada Water. And I'll share with you a few slides and a few thoughts about what we're about and what we're trying to achieve. But I wanted to start by just sharing a short video that sets the scene.
This station, Canada Water. Change here for London Overground.
My journey to work, I cycle so near Greenland Dock. Some days I look at the sun on the water and I think, what an amazing place.
Canada Water has always been a pioneering neighbourhood, as Elizabethan market gardens to the proud history of the Docklands.
The name is quite special because it relates to the history of the area. The timber that would have come from Canada, from Russia.
And what we're trying to do next is just create the next chapter in this pioneering history of Canada Water.
Teddy London was really attracted to Canada Water because of the area itself. For our students, we believe that this combination of really being close to the centre of London, to this hub of activity, but with a local community feel.
We are currently in the paper garden, which is the creation of many hands of the community. Our vision in the future is to have pockets that are co-created with the community and looked after by the community, so that people can create homes here and livelihoods here, and nature can be an integral part of that.
We're looking to create one of the most sustainable regeneration projects in the UK. We're going to do this by enhancing the existing nature of the site and increasing the biodiversity and ecological richness of the area, looking at innovative ways to reduce carbon, both in construction and in operation, and working with the existing community and looking at ways to enhance social connection, health and well-being.
I think it's brilliant to be here at the start.
Bringing a lot of life.
Creating spaces where exploring, being creative.
I think everyone that comes here, they discover it, they didn't know it before and they want to stay.
I hope that played well for all of you and certainly has given you a bit of a taster for what this project's about. Would love to come and show any of you around the site, so do get in touch after this webinar and contact us, and we'd be delighted to show you around. So what's it all about? Well, it is, we think, the UK's most sustainable new town centre. There hasn't been a new town centre delivered in London or in much of the UK from what we can see for quite some time. And when best to do it, other than coming out of a pandemic with everybody thinking differently about our urban environments, about our parks, about our homes, where we work, how we shop. It is really a unique opportunity to put all of that thinking into practice and create something fantastic for London. So where is it? Well, it is on the interchange between the Jubilee line that runs east-west, London Bridge 2 stops away, Westminster and further beyond, equally very close. But what's particularly interesting, given it's an interchange, is the connection running north-south. Why is that interesting? Well, south East London is still relatively affordable in London terms for people choosing where to live, and Canada Water provides easy access for those living in southeast London to be able to connect into the city and beyond. But it has got a backstory. It might be a new town centre that we're delivering, but we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. And this part of London, known as the Rotherhithe Peninsula, was a very active industrial dock yard, in effect, where over 65% of the whole area was covered in water up until the late 1960s, where timber and food from North America and Scandinavia arrived here to feed and supply the rest of London's trade. And in the late 60s, that closed, and the London Docklands Development Corporation, with the local authority, set about filling it all in. And what they filled it in with was primarily green space, the legacy of which we have now to work with. Over 130 acres of green space and remaining water bodies in an area that's incredibly central, 2 stops from London Bridge, but feeling like it's miles out of town. And from a residential perspective, and particularly given the theme of this discussion around health and well-being, having that quantum and scale of open space and water provides a perfect basis for a fantastic sustainable new development. This is an aerial shot of the site today, 53 acres, which is about 26 football pitches in kind of normal parlour, to give you a sense of the scale. And you can see here how close we are to the river's edge, how close we are to the city skyline and Tower Bridge. And then on the east and western edges, some of those open spaces and water that I've been talking about. That's a shot of it uncovered, again with the city skyline and the immediate context as it is today. Comprises a 1989 shopping centre that still looks in part like it did back in 1989, together with a number of industrial buildings, leisure, boxes that you might imagine located much further outside of London. So a perfect regeneration opportunity waiting to happen. And the next slide just gives you an impression of, as if by magic, 10 years time, this is the skyline that you'll be looking at when the master plan and the town centre is completed. But it's more than just buildings, much more. And when you're creating a whole new piece of city, places for people to call home, places for people to come and visit, work and enjoy, actually you're not arriving in a place that hasn't already got a backstory. As I mentioned, with its heritage as an industrial heartland, but it's also home to about 30,000 people who live in and around it. And a development of this scale has to do its best to bring new development, new investment, but also to make sure that the people who live there already today feel and see the benefit of change happening around them. So well in advance of any of the developments starting or any of the construction starting, we've been working now for a number of years with the local community, with local schools and charities, to start to define what a fairer and equal new piece of city means for them. Are there opportunities for local people to see job opportunities in the new development? Are there affordable homes that young people or local people can really have access to? And so creating that legacy from the start is something we have been thinking about and will continue to deliver as we roll out the master plan. And we've defined that by writing down some commitments, pledges, if you like, about what that means in practice. There are 4 pillars to that social regeneration charter. And the purpose for writing them down is to keep our feet to the fire, both ours and the local authorities, and also to check in every year or every few years to see how we're doing. Are people genuinely feeling that this is a place to belong or a place to be happy and healthy? If so, great, but actually equally important, if not, how do we pivot what we're doing, where our investment is focused, to make sure that this is truly a sustainable development and new town centre that benefits everybody who wants to enjoy it. So what is the master plan? Well, we have planning permission for an outline master plan of about 7 million square feet, and that is broken down into various uses, including up to 3,000 homes, of which 35% of those will be affordable housing, about 2.5 million square feet of workspace, and up to 1 million square feet of retail, leisure, education and culture. So a genuinely mixed use master plan, which I think does make it different. There are lots of residential developments and new schemes being delivered all over the place, but they tend to be residentially led. And I think Canada Water can be as much about living here as it is visiting or as it is working. And that kind of real urban living, I think, is what London needs more of, much more mixed use, rather than binary locations for certain uses, which just don't generate the footfall and activity to create the sort of environments that I think we all want to enjoy spending our time in. The first building is on site. It's a residential and working office-led scheme, colloquially known as Plot A1, and that completes in the summer of 2024. The residential in this is for build to sell, but it actually has been designed with some of the facets of build to rent in mind. And what I mean by that is many build to rent schemes talk about amenities, talk about lifestyle, talk about opportunities for the tenants or customers to be able to work in their building, enjoy the leisure amenities on offer. And actually, I think you can do that in a product or in a building that is for sale as much as it is often offered in buildings that are for rent. This building is at the start of what will be the new High Street. This is an image that shows you the new residential entrance on the right-hand side, just at the exit of Canada Water Tube Station. And these are some images that show you the tower, the 35 stories of it, but also importantly, some of the lower level elements to the building and the sort of quality of environment that we will be creating. The views are pretty phenomenal. This is a view out of the tower, back over Tower Bridge. And these are some of the interiors of the apartments that will be being delivered in this building, which completes in 2024. But it's much more than just the buildings. And so, although we were just looking at that tall tower, which is in the top right of the image, you can see in front of you, as much time and thought is going into the design and the delivery of the public realm and the spaces, if you like, in between buildings. And I think for anybody that spent time in urban environments or spent time in European cities, it's never the architecture that you you're often drawn to, but actually the spaces in between the buildings, those lovely European squares or the promenades that often have been around for decades, with buildings that are coming and going and being quite incidental actually compared to the importance of the public realm. And we've taken a similar approach at Canada Water, and so what you're looking at here is the new public realm that's going to be created along the dock edge, a new bridge that will be driven across that dock, designed deliberately to give people much more participation with the water, much more participation with nature. But town centres like Canada Water need a variety of spaces, and so as well as the big set pieces of new bridges across major pieces of water, we've included quieter spaces, smaller courtyards for quieter contemplation or for different kinds of socialising, and just a bit more variety, if you like, in people's sensory experience. I think if COVID has hopefully taught us anything positive, it's been about the value of open spaces, private space, be it your balcony, big public spaces in terms of municipal parks, but also the value of spaces like this dock office courtyard, which is much more sheltered, much quieter, nowhere near a road. And in terms of kind of air quality and noise quality, a very different kind of experience in which to spend some time. And beyond the green spaces, the other key focus for us on Canada Water is around health, physical health, also mental health. But in terms of physical health, we're delivering a new leisure centre as part of the first phase, and a deliberate intention on our part to design a leisure centre that is a public sector run initiative. It won't be a private gym put in the bottom of a residential tower. Moreover, it's an amenity that is available to the public, designed to the best quality standards. And this is an image to show you the entrance to the new leisure centre, which will be situated just next door to that tower we were just looking at. And then the third site that is under construction at the moment is plot K1. This is different again. It's a lower rise block being delivered adjacent to some of that 130 acres of open space. This is family housing, designed and located adjacent to two primary schools, where we're delivering affordable housing for Southwark Council. And this is an image of the building designed by Morris & Co. So those three buildings are the ones that are on site. They're all completing in the next 3 years. And then what I've got is just a taster of some of the different kinds of product that will be delivered thereafter, more residential, in an effort to deliver ultimately up to 3,000 homes over the whole master plan. Zone L is in for planning at the moment. It's 237 homes split across a number of tenures, including social rent, intermediate housing and private housing. And we're, wherever we can, looking to integrate mixtures of tenures within blocks, not because we have to do it, I think because we see the real value in creating a mixed and balanced community across the master plan. There is a genuine intent on our part for Canada Water to be somewhere that creates opportunities for multi-intergenerational living, from student housing to senior living, and it will be delivered, and this is Zone L that comes forward over the next few years. And then these are some of the images of some of our charity partners who we're working with. There is a very well-established local charity called Time and Talents. They are involved in helping us figure out how we design bits of the public realm in order that they are accessible and welcoming to people of older generations, as well as engaging with local schools and different community partners who represent different age groups in an effort to try and make sure that we, as best we can, address needs of different age groups and different levels of ability across the town centre. And, you know, I talked about smaller spaces. We talked about the dock and the bridge that we're designing and delivering. But then there are other pieces such as the new public park. So this is a 3.5 acre park, which will be delivered in the second phase. Different again, more akin to municipal type parks that many of you will be familiar with, but a place for general recreation. And as you can see from the image, desperately keen to see those across the generations all able to enjoy it. And then in terms of sort of rounding up the discussion on public realm and health and well-being, making sure that the master plan has been designed to create welcoming streets. This is an indication of a typical residential street, but noting that active travel is at the heart of it. Pedestrian friendly streets are the default. Cycling ability is deliberately designed in from the outset right across the master plan, with a real reduction in the number of routes that are possible by car in an effort to try and encourage that active travel. And then places for other uses. So we've talked about homes. I've showed you some buildings that are being designed for living, some that are being designed for working. But the master plan is much more than just that. And here you can see an image of a typical retail street. Again, very pedestrian dominant, where we're looking to create a retail experience that is accessible for a range of different users, both for F&B, also for experiential retail. And the master plan also provides for affordable retail and affordable workspace that will be incorporated in streets like this. And I think that is it from me, and I shall hand you back. Thank you very much.
Emma, thank you so much for that. You've taken a very broad brush approach to improving the quality of life for local people. So not just providing public realm and amenities, but notably working with local charities to do pretty much everything, run food banks, improve literacy, provide training, careers advice. So how does this relationship play out once the development has been delivered? Are you able to maintain this kind of custodianship role within that community?
We will. I mean, we're a very long-term owner of property. We rarely sell developments once we've created them. We like to hold them and generate an income stream. And a key driver of that is obviously keeping them full, keeping them lively, and keeping them well received in the local community. So the work that we've done in the run up to development continues through construction, and then once the thing is stabilised, our role continues in an asset management role. We talk about it as being the equivalent of the Wednesday afternoon bell. If you were educated or went to school in the UK, typically Wednesday afternoons were always for kind of sport or recreation. And we see Canada Water having a metaphorical Wednesday afternoon bell, where whether you work here, live here, either existing resident or new resident, British Land will kind of ring that metaphorical bell on a Wednesday afternoon. You can all stop what you're doing if you want to. It's not compulsory, but to continue in the efforts to engage with local charities, do some volunteering, go and play some sport, just do something that's kind of important for your health and well-being. That needs facilitating. So, you know, we see our role kind of rightly or wrongly as that ongoing custodian and ringing that metaphorical bell.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And if you have any questions for Emma, please use the box on your screen and we'll get through as many as we can during the panel discussion at the end of part 3. But now I'd like to introduce Ben Hancock, Managing Director at Oscar Acoustics. So Ben, over to you.
Oscar Acoustics are now in their 44th year. We've been leaders in manufacturing acoustic enclosures, then the application of acoustic spray-on finishes for reverberation over the years. Now we're using all this experience to bring an exciting range of soundproofing products. So I have a couple of lovely friends called Rich and Magda. Rich called me a couple of weeks ago asking if I would mind popping round to his new build flat, as his upstairs neighbour had complained that he could hear the TV all the time. They had moved in just before COVID, hence this being the first time being there. The neighbour said that he'd always heard the TV, but it had got much worse over the last year. This means this very polite neighbour had endured this stress for some time before finally building up the courage to say something. And Rich and Magda had absolutely no idea. They were gutted that they'd put him through this and had been wearing headphones to watch TV ever since. They also couldn't believe this was happening in a new building. The moment I stepped into the living room, I saw part of the issue. Around a year ago, they had a handyman in to mount the TV up on the wall. This is bad enough from a sound transfer point of view, but the guy asked if they would also like the soundbar mounted on the wall beneath it. And it is people innocently not understanding how sound transfer works that can cause many of the issues between neighbours. The trouble is that builders don't always know. I've even known of people that fit soundproofing ceilings and walls for a living to make basic errors that prevent their own installation from working. Here's a brief explanation of how noise transfer happens, giving floors and ceilings as an example. Sound travels in two ways, through the air as airborne sound and as direct vibration or impact sound. If someone is banging, crashing, jumping, playing music, or just talking in the room above you, the vibrations and sound pressure waves generated will travel through the floor and joists, with the vibrations traveling into your ceiling and effectively turning it into a speaker. In Rich and Magda having the soundbar attached directly to the wall, the vibrations were traveling up it and turning their neighbour's wall and floor into an extension of their sound system. The difference in the last year had been what was previously just the airborne noise from the TV and soundbar on the TV stand to having the sound source directly connected to the building itself. So how to stop it? There's a number of ways to reduce noise between floors. You can remove the standard thermal insulation and swap it for well-fitted acoustic insulation. That's a good start. When using acoustic rock wool slab, improved performance can be achieved by leaving an air gap beneath to help reduce the vibration path into your plasterboard. Or replacing the existing plasterboard for something like soundblock plasterboard. That can help a little by adding 1 to 2 dB of performance, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but actually is quite noticeable. Impact noise can be reduced by using a dense carpet, specialist acoustic flooring systems or acoustic foams. However, there are several reasons why these methods can be impractical or ineffective, not least because they all require access to the floor above. But if you can break the path of vibration with a quality rubber insulated acoustic isolation hanger, effectively creating what's known as a floating ceiling, this is by far the most effective and hassle-free solution. For the ultimate professional grade and cost-effective soundproofing, we invented the Oscar ISO mount. Being an engineering company at heart, when we decide to design a new product for the Oscar Acoustics range, it needs to be significantly better to what is already on the market, solving all current issues. We decided to concentrate on a handful of points, knowing other benefits would follow. So class-leading acoustic performance, of course, the minimum of ceiling height loss, certified fire performance, height adjustable, allowing for flat ceilings across uneven joists. All the work is done from the room below. Fast, economical and simple clip-together installation, and designed and made in Great Britain, specifically Kent. This is the ISOmount Type 1 and was the first in the range of 3. So taking the first point, ISOmount Type 1's acoustic performance comes from being attached to the side of the ceiling joist, but ensuring the vibration path is broken by the rubber block. And this therefore is not directly connected to the ceiling channels and ceiling. A huge amount of R&D went into choosing the perfect grade and shore of this rubber to ensure us to achieve the optimum performance. On this image, you can see that with the rubber block in the center of the ISOmount, the ceiling channel is completely isolated from the L bracket on the joist. This is where systems like Resilient Bar lose valuable performance. They may create a space in which to insert insulation and also give a degree of damping due to their spring, but they are a direct connection of noise and vibration to the new ceiling, meaning it's not truly isolated. They can also be problematic to fit without compromising performance. For peace and quiet, the isolated ISOmount's the way to go, achieving better than compliance with British building regs approved document E for airborne and impact sound. So how well does it perform in the real world? Here's some great feedback from a home DIY installer called James. Ceiling is complete. So I've tested it by powering up a loud DeWalt router in the garage and seeing how loud it was in the room above. Wow, can hardly hear it. It was much quieter than I thought it would be. I can finally use the workshop in the evening when the kids are asleep in the room above. I'll admit not having done it before, as I was unsure it would deaden the noise enough for power tools, but I'm blown away by how well it works. Thanks again for your help, most appreciated. Some nice feedback there. This image also brings us nicely on to the second point of minimum ceiling height loss. Most systems either fix to the underside of the joist, or their design means that the ceiling channel must run across the joist instead of being neatly tucked up beside it. When in its highest position, the ISOmount system loses as little as 5 to 6 millimeters instead of what's commonly at least 40 to 70 millimeters of lost height with other systems. This is particularly useful when fitting soundproofing to basement flats or rooms where architectural features prevent much height loss. Fire performance, of course, is also extremely important in the current climate, and it's only going to get stricter. When designing our product, I called our competitors' technical departments, and when asked what fire rating their product achieved, all but one stated that the acoustic system did not require a fire rating as it was protected by the plasterboard, which did have one. That simply is not correct, and a dangerous misconception by some manufacturers and contractors. An acoustic hanger or bar forms part of the ceiling makeup. If the product fails due to heat, the entire ceiling will collapse. As regs get tighter, I can see contractors having to remove non-compliant ceilings. So always insist on having a copy of their fire test report for your records. We're proud to say that the ISOmount system achieved a 90-minute fire rating at BRE in the tested configuration. So please contact us or see our website for more details on that configuration. Now, I mentioned that being height adjustable was one of our aims. Here you can see it in its highest position. The lowest position for the ISOmount actually achieves a 40 millimeter gap beneath the joist, allowing for plenty of adjustment when trying to create a level ceiling across uneven joists. Waving ceilings screwed to the underside of uneven joists are now a thing of the past. And for extreme adjustment, it is possible to locally screw blocks to the underside of the joists where the ISO mounts are required. More good news is that all the work is done from the room below. Acoustic floor systems can be extremely labour intensive, as building up floor depth leads to skirting boards, doors and floors in rooms that don't require soundproofing, all to be adjusted and levelled. If you're having a dispute with your upstairs neighbour, ISO mounts mean that you can also do all the work from the room below without disturbing their fun. So this testimonial is from another DIY installer called Jim. The whole transaction has been simple and easy. I fitted the ceiling this weekend and it's made an instant difference. So much so that I had to ask the owner of the flat above if he'd been using the room. I will recommend this product to my friends and will use it on other ceilings in my flats. Keep up the good work. Many ISO mount competitors are designed to work only with their own proprietary channels, which can add a significant amount to the overall build cost. Vere's ISO mount is designed to be compatible with off-the-shelf channels such as British Gypsum's GL1 or Gypliner 1, although there's many on the market with the same dimensions. This brings the channel cost down to as little as 88 pence per length for the BG version. And if you run out, they are readily available from most builders' merchants instead of waiting for a top-up delivery. Once the ISO mounts are up, the channels clip quickly into place and require no mechanical fixing at all, making installation very fast. The plasterboard is then screwed to the channels. For optimum performance, most choose 2 layers of board staggering the joints. So this is an interesting testimonial from a builder called Richard. I did not fully appreciate at the time, but the use of ISO mount with industry standard metal channel was a huge bonus and cost saver. Also, we did not appreciate how much time and money we saved using the adjustable ISO mounts to level the uneven joists. Now installed, the ceiling is superb and flat as a pancake. In terms of acoustic insulation, the system is superb, and overall, I couldn't be more pleased with the end result. The ISO mount system is a brilliant way to isolate between floors. I highly recommend it. Next on the list, extremely proud of the product, and with the intention of exporting all around the world, it was extremely important to ensure it was designed and made in Great Britain. More specifically, Kent, where we're based. We've been working very closely with the Department of International Trade for a big global launch. Following the popularity and incredible feedback we had from the ISO mount Type 1, we decided to launch Type 2 and Type 3 using the same principles and most of the same components. ISO mount Type 2 uses a C bracket instead of an L bracket, enabling the user to fix directly into concrete or where plasterboard ceilings cannot be removed, such as listed buildings. As with Type 1, the channels clip quickly into place, this time giving you a 50mm void. Where larger voids are required, for example, where you might drop a ceiling to encase a beam or where higher acoustic or thermal performance is needed, drop rods and fittings are available as kits. And finally, ISO mount Type 3. This version uses the same components as Type 1 and is designed to provide a 100mm void, but with plus or minus adjustment built in. You fix the first L bracket into position, and then the second L bracket is designed to slide up and down it. At any one time, 2 of the smaller holes up the sides will line up, giving a millimetre adjustment at a time. Once you have the correct height, just rivet the 2 lining up holes. This makes levelling with a laser extremely fast. Once fixed in position, the rubber block and saddle is slotted into place, followed by clipping on the channels. As you can see here, like Type 2, it is also perfectly suited to concrete and that inbuilt adjustment will help with levelling across the slab joints. And that is the range in a nutshell. Everything's available to purchase on our website shop, including all the accessories and with quantity discounts automatically applied as you go. So for a peaceful life as a designer, specifier, developer or homeowner, please consider our Oscar ISO mount soundproofing ceiling range. And Rich and Magda, well, they can now watch TV and at an acceptable level without disturbing their neighbour. They do love their music and wish they could play that as they choose. So as it's their own flat and they've got no plans to leave, they've chosen to go for the full ISO mount system so they can properly relax in their own home. Please do follow us on our social media channels to see more videos and photos. Don't forget you can find the intro video and a step-by-step installation animation for types 1, 2 and 3 on our YouTube channel and website. I hope you found it to be informative. Many thanks.
Thank you for that, Ben. You've explained that ISO mount type 2 is particularly useful for retrofitting listed buildings. But inevitably, applying an additional layer to any ceiling is going to have an impact on the appearance and proportions of that particular room. So have you or any of your clients encountered any kickback when you propose that solution as part of an application for listed buildings consent?
So being the designer, the manufacturer and the supplier of the product, we don't tend to get too involved at that stage. Whilst we've had customers that have used it in listed buildings, we don't really get involved in the process of actually getting them approved. But no, they have been. And the fact that the system fits to the existing substrate and drops beneath it, it kind of encapsulates any features in the ceiling without really disturbing them, other than maybe a few holes per square meter, just screw holes per square meter. That way the whole ceiling is kept intact. Sometimes when you fit up the rock wall slab to save it dropping down to the lower half, you can use the self-adhesive stick pins. They kind of sticky self-adhesive stick up on the ceiling, and then you can just slide the rock wall slab onto that. If you don't want to use that, so you haven't got the stick pin stuck to your original ceiling, what you can actually use is our cell bar finish, which is a loose fill made of fire-treated recycled paper. So once you've removed that soundproof ceiling, everything is exactly as you left it.
And there'll be an opportunity to put questions to Ben in the Q&A discussion at the end of part 3. So our next speaker is Flora Samuel, who is Professor of Architecture in the Built Environment at the University of Reading and is leading a nationwide research project on community consultation for the Quality of Life Foundation. Flora.
So I'm going to be talking about building quality of life data into planning and housing, because we can't make housing better without knowing what works. So I believe that in the future, housing will be based on data on what works for quality of life. And I use quality of life interchangeably with social value. So this talk focuses on 3 considerations that need to be built into all projects, I would argue, in order to get the housing we need and in the right places. And these are social value measurement, participation, and we need integrated data management systems. So what I'm going to talk about is fairly techie and data orientated. So I put a picture of Marmalade Lane here on the side to remember this is all about trying to make great places to live. So this presentation builds on the work of 3 collaborative research projects: Mapping Eco-Social Assets, the Better Places Toolkit, which is a project with Stantec, and Community Consultation for Quality of Life. Right, I'm going to start with social value. So what is social value? I think the UK Green Building Council has done a great job of defining social value. It's fundamentally connected with economic and environmental value. They all come together. But in order to talk, if you talk about them as a bundle, social value tends to get lost. We have quite good measures of economic data, which are obviously money, and environmental data, carbon, biodiversity, those sort of things. But it's the social value area, which I think is the unique contribution of architecture, is really poorly explicated. So I'm going to focus quite a bit on social value at this point, but they are fundamentally connected, and I see climate change as a social justice issue. So social value has zoomed up the policy agenda with Social Value Act 2012, and it's integrated into the National Planning Policy Framework, which is again about the triple bottom line: economic, social and environmental. This triple bottom line is also in the Treasury Green Book, which is how the government theoretically makes decisions about how it spends its money. So it makes sense for us to align our work with that, those measures. Now, a really interesting piece of work that came through Anne Bentley's report, Procuring for Value, and through the work of the Construction Innovation Hub Value Tool, is that we're moving towards a situation for building procurement, which is away from the old-fashioned contracts towards value-based procurement, where the team works together to deliver certain kinds of value: economic, social, environmental. And indeed, local authority procurement systems are grinding in that direction as well. So we've got to get on top of this whole value thing, and to make sure that the social is not forgotten. And I just mentioned this is the Centre for Digital Built Britain, the University of Cambridge, is busy trying to develop digital twins of places, where which is all about the information flows from the BIM models to the GIS models to the CAD models. How is information going to be flowing and connecting in the future places? And how will all this lead into our digital planning system that the government is keen to promote at this time? So these are backdrops for our work on the Social Value Toolkit for Architecture. So a bunch of us people who lead on research in practice got together to make a social value toolkit for architecture. And our aim was to develop a simple, practical toolkit of evidencing and measuring the social value of good design for use in housing. A lot of the people in the group work in housing practices, and they found that the way in which social value has traditionally been measured tends to be very tick boxy about the construction phase, how many offenders were re-employed or whatever. It's not been about the well-being generated by good design in use. So this was very much the aim of this tool. We wanted to understand impact of design through qualitative and quantitative post-occupancy evaluation, and we wanted to get the social value of design on the policy agenda. And I think we really managed to do this. So it started off with a workshop at HCA LLP with lots of social value experts. We did a literature review, a grey literature of all the wellbeing literature to think what we needed to cover. We came up with these headline outcomes of things that were quite common to all the wellbeing literature. And the New Economics Foundation 5 Ways to Wellbeing was very influential, I would say. But we noticed that everybody tends to take different words. They use different words for these categories. And the more that we can get clarity and agreement on what these categories are, the easier it is to start collecting evidence and rolling together big data on these things. So we took these headline outcomes and we tested them out with architects in practice and in universities to try and develop some post-occupancy evaluation questions. And these were, once we developed those, we had pilot projects with a range of housing practices. Now, these are examples of the kind of post-occupancy evaluation questions that we were asking. And, you know, they may look like very simple, but actually incredible amount of work goes into them. And this thing, the strongly agree to disagree, is a Likert scale, which is a kind of multiplier that you can use on these statements. Because we, in the Social Value Toolkit for Architecture, we discussed the monetizing of social value impacts using social return on investment. Now, I've become increasingly skeptical about monetizing of social value, but we offered a methodology for doing that, should you be interested. So the Social Value Toolkit for Architecture has been published by the RIBA, and I've been told by practices that they've had greater success with their social value statements for bids that they've been doing. So that is, that's one good outcome of the whole thing. But we realized when we were making the Social Value Toolkit that social value is meaningless unless it's spatialized, unless it's mapped. If you look at the borough of Kensington, you've got North Kensington, which is full of people who are on low incomes, and you've got the super rich there as well. And if you bundle them all together, you end up with a kind of grey mush. So you need to know where the social value is happening. So we developed a research project called Mapping Eco-Social Assets, and we were mapping with communities. Our case study was an estate in Reading, and we use stickers and writing, and we work with schools and churches and all sorts to find out what people valued in their area. We tested the maps back with people once we'd done them, and we came up with these, using the social value toolkit as a starting point. We came up with layers of where people felt connected, where they had activity, where they took notice of nature and so on, where they felt positive, and developed these things that we came to call the happy maps, which are kind of heat maps of where people were feeling good, where they were experiencing quality of life. Now, that was very laborious, and you can read all about it in this report, but it was very obvious that this stuff had to become digital, because doing the translation from the handmade maps it took an awful lot of time, and you want to hit as many people as you can. So this was a concern of another project, the Better Places Toolkit, which was a project with Stantec, which was looking at how to get social value into the local plan stage. The point in planning when the local authority makes all these decisions, which are incredibly important for the future of the area, but which are currently generally based on economic impact and sustainability. Social pretty much not there. So with Stantec, we've been developing a technique of what we call passive data mapping, which is using ONS data, the census and so on, and GIS techniques to make maps of the data that's known about an area. If you put this together with the active maps that we made in Reading, you start getting a very rich picture of what's actually going on in an area, particularly if you overlay it with maps of topography, and the topography layer can start in elements of artificial intelligence can be put into the topography layer to account for things like motorways being in the way, mountains being in the way, those sorts of things. So you can start developing a very rich value map of a place. The conclusion from these projects is that people enjoy working with maps. Social value must be spatialized, and social value maps have the potential to be very useful to decision makers, while being also transparent and easy to understand. You can imagine if you put a map with social, a map with environmental, and economic together, and you start having an amazing evidence base for planning. So a crucial element of this is participation. So we've got another project, Community Consultation for Quality of Life, which is all about participation in planning. Instead of the Social Value Toolkit, we're using the Quality of Life framework, which is a framework for measuring quality of life, developed by URBED with a lot of experts, and it's constantly under review and being changed as the Quality of Life develops its offer around post-occupancy evaluation and so on. So this is an ongoing project. Please go and have a look at our website. We're doing urban rooms, places for face-to-face consultation. We've just done one in Reading. We've got one coming up in Cardiff, one in Edinburgh, and then one in Belfast in September. And this is a place for doing face-to-face consultation. So we're using a digital platform, Commonplace, but face-to-face, so we can explain it or work through it with people who don't tend to use digital things. People also have opportunities to write and draw and stuff like that while they're at it. So ours was a very, very no-frills space in Broad Street Mall, opposite Poundland in Reading. But in a way, the no-frillsness of it enabled us to start to adapt and change as we went along. So this is a version of the digital map, and you start seeing it builds up with responses. And we can make heat maps of where you connect with nature, where you go to feel healthy, these sorts of things. So this was a remarkable experience. We got lots of people from all different kinds of backgrounds. We even used the Commonplace platform, translating it into things like and other languages like Farsi, so people did the maps, but they also did a map survey about how their experience of participation, and we're busy analysing all that data at the moment. And we had a whole range of events around with the community about what they wanted and what they needed. So we're going to be delivering pilots in all 4 nations and writing reports on consultation for all 4 nations. Ultimately, we're going to publish a code of conduct for consultation. Bizarrely, this doesn't exist, and so much improvement needs to happen in this area. So early conclusions from working on these projects, we really do need to establish a code of conduct for consultation. It needs to be professionalized, and we have to make the process of determining planning applications more democratic. There's a general phenomenal level of people feel incredibly disempowered from planning. And if you read this literature review that we're bringing out at the end of the month, April, you'll start to see why, because we gathered the data on what's going on with participation in planning. And really, participation hasn't changed since after World War II, when people were trying to get things built fast. So that's participation. We need to be gathering data with people, and we need to be collecting this stuff together. Now, Scotland has got this amazing digital planning system coming together. It realises that all this stuff needs to be integrated. You need to be integrating what people want. You need to be integrating post-occupancy evaluation data from people's houses. They need to flow into a river of data about places and things. And I think this is starting to really take off. So mapping, Greater Manchester has an amazing mapping site, all sorts of things that are happening in Manchester, but it hasn't been quite choreographed as yet. And we believe that this sort of the data that local authorities like Manchester can hold could be choreographed into social value layers, environmental layers, economic layers, to aid decision making going forward. And this has implications for the transformation of planning that's going on at the moment, because there's a lot of talk about prop tech and coding outcomes into planning. Now, we argue this shouldn't just be about should a building be 3 stories high or made of brick or whatever. Places need to be coded for real-time environmental, social, and economic outcomes. And planning should not be happening, the local plans should not be happening once every 5 years. They should be developing on an ongoing basis. And we needed fluid planning. The pandemic just showed how urgently we need to be able to respond to situations fast. So everything is suggesting that planning is going to become much more fluid, less rigid, less about plans from time to time. And we anticipate a moment where if we had social, environmental, and economic codes, then planners could make sensitive adjustments when they see overheating happening in areas. For example, over gentrification, you start building more social housing in that area, or so on. So if this sounds far-fetched, you should go and read this book, Local Code, which is a very fascinating repository of ideas about coding places. So Stantec, I'm working with Stantec at the moment. We're developing a report on delivering better place outcomes through the use of data. And this should be out in a couple of months. We believe that we need a standardized format for digital maps. There needs to be a whole system view of data management across the built environment, and great improvements to interdisciplinary working. Fundamentally, we need to make data accessible and available and intelligible. Communities need good data to know how to make decisions about their places. I've noticed that in my work that small practices have a real problem with accessing data because it's too expensive for them to access. So they are handicapped by that inability to work with data. But we generally need to we just have to develop better data about the relationship between people and places, all the things that have been talked in this session, safety and well-being and so on. So in conclusion, I would say it isn't really possible to improve quality of life in housing without collecting data on what really works. And this data has to be qualitative and quantitative. It has to be passive and active. It has to be made with people and generated through Nectar cards, ONS, whatever, so that you bring the best of both worlds together. It must be straightforward and relatively cheap to collect. So this is where automation comes in, and it must almost be collected face-to-face and digitally. You have to give opportunities to people to give their opinion face-to-face. We discovered in Reading a whole raft of people who didn't have an email address, and their voices need to be heard. So the way it's collected must be reviewed and adjusted constantly. It's not ever going to be perfect, and the context is constantly changing. So we have to be very sensitive to changes that are needed. And the data must be representative of the demography of place. So if you have data maps and you know about the demography of the people who've responded to those maps, you can potentially amplify the power of certain groups to make sure that the maps are representative of the demography of place. These are the kind of things we're exploring, particularly as we move to potentially to participatory budgeting, which is something that's already happening in places like London Borough of Newham. So we think data collection must be designed to appeal to and include as many people as possible. This is where the arts and humanities, creativity, museums, they all have a huge role to play in getting people into those places. And data must be widely available in intelligible formats to facilitate community decision making. So there's a lot of space here and opportunities around information design. Ultimately, data must be spatialized. We have to stop collecting data into bundles. It just doesn't make any sense anymore. And this is why I think the whole world of social return on investment will be disrupted by data mapping around well-being. So huge potential here. So I'm pleased to say that our CC Qual methodology is going to be trialled on a real live combined local authority, Harlow and Gilston, because Quality of Life Foundation and Stantec and Commonplace were successful in getting funding from the government's PropTech fund for doing that. Housing for Hope and Wellbeing is a book that I've just completed, and it brings this whole story together into one place, and that's going to be published at the end of this year. But we're also doing a lot of explorations with other practices on how to bring social value into BIM modelling, and are using other digital techniques for gathering and predicting social value. So I hope that by the end of this, you've got a picture that social value, quality of life is not, it is possible to collect data on it. And in a digital world, we have to collect data on it. Otherwise, it will be forgotten. It will be forgotten from maps, it will be forgotten from spreadsheets, and it will be ignored. So this is our chance to get the social value, quality of life, well-being that architects and others can generate in projects on the map, valued and recognized and paid for, so that we can change entirely people's experience of where they live. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, Flora, what advice can you give to any viewers who may be extremely accomplished architects or urban designers, but won't necessarily be versed in things like data mapping or evidence-based research? Where's the best place to start if they want to find out what information is available about a given area or issue? And crucially, how do they begin to build up these sorts of skills within their practice?
Oh, well, I've written extensively about this in my book, Why Architects Matter, which is about evidencing the value of architects. But really, first of all, developing a practice data strategy would be a good start. Doesn't matter how small, tiny practice, you start developing small bits of post-occupancy evaluation, ideally mapping it spatially so that we can find out where the impacts happen. That would be great. Get some GIS capability into your practice. There are students coming through, University of Reading students learn how to do GIS, come bring them into your practice and they'll start transforming what you're capable of doing from the bottom up, I think, as much as bringing in programmers. Some practices are bringing programmers, artificial intelligence experts, all sorts in at the moment. Quality of Life Foundation is developing a service to help people to demonstrate quality of life. And there are other digital platforms like Commonplace, Built ID and so on, which are also excellent for helping you capture and spatialize the impact of what you do.
Great, some really good advice there. Now, our final speaker in part 3 is Patrick Michel, who is a partner at Platform 5 Architects.
I'm going to be talking about our work with the charity Toynbee Hall and how we were part of a team that transformed their East London estate with the completion of a mixed-use master plan. The estate is located to the south of Spitalfields Market, and Toynbee Hall has provided essential help, support and advice to people in the East End who are facing poverty and injustice. The Grade 2 listed building Toynbee Hall was built on the site in 1884 and has been a focal point for the local community for over 130 years. So I'm just going to take you through a little bit of the history of the site and how that's fed into the master plan. So the original hall was set back within the city block. You have Spitalfields Market up in this corner, Aldgate East now down here, and Whitechapel High Street there. So Toynbee Hall sort of sat in the middle of this sort of urban block behind sort of lines of warehouses and tenement blocks. The picture on the right is a sort of view from Commercial Street, where you can see the buildings which used to front onto Commercial Street and the archway leading through here to Toynbee Hall. So during the Second World War, the area is heavily bombed, and the warehouses had a lot of flammable material and burnt out. So all that was left was the facades for a section of buildings along Commercial Street. Again, this is a building you saw in the previous slide with the arched route into Toynbee Hall, and this is sat within the Toynbee Hall itself, the sort of historic clock tower there, which still remains, and then this archway was a link through to Commercial Street. And these buildings sort of post-war were demolished, leaving the site looking quite different, so all open along the Commercial Street elevation, and within the basement of the previous buildings a new public space was created called Malham Gardens, which is sort of owned by Tower Hamlets. And you can see here, this is the historic hall and sort of the buildings that survived, and here's a sort of a bombed out library building which was later demolished. Then during sort of the middle to late 20th century, new housing was sort of built to the perimeter of the block, again Toynbee Hall in the middle, and some office buildings were built to the frontage along Commercial Street. And as you can see, the sort of new, sort of rather unsympathetic block of housing sort of encroaches on the view from the street to Toynbee Hall, and Toynbee Hall itself is less accessible, and Malham Gardens is not particularly accessible, being set down at basement level with layers of walls and railings between you and the hall, and also by the nature of being a sunken garden, it has sort of attracted antisocial behaviour over the years. So at this point, the Toynbee Hall had a Grade 2 listed building which was suffering from water ingress from the roof, as a lot of the spaces were becoming unusable and water damaged, and also had sort of an estate of sort of mid-century buildings which were not really fit for purpose, very cramped accommodation, very low ceilings, and not providing the quality of housing or office space which they need. So Toynbee Hall was determined to ensure that its spaces would be relevant and valuable to the local communities for the next 130 years, and set out on an ambitious plan to restore its historic home and develop new assets around a central community garden in a major redevelopment with a strong social purpose. Toynbee Hall selected London Square, and this is how we entered the project. London Square brought us in as architects. So London Square acted as a partner in order to raise capital for the works which Toynbee Hall needed to do, and to realise part of the transformative mixed-use master plan for the estate, keeping the historic hall at its heart. Many other partners were involved, plenty of architects, contractors, consultants, and the funding of the project came from multiple sources, including the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So we created this vision, which was a sort of a development of a master plan which was first sort of conceived of by Richard Griffiths Architects. So Richard Griffiths largely does historic work, and they were involved directly with Toynbee Hall doing the extension and refurbishment to the hall itself, and we were brought in with London Square to design these contemporary buildings which framed the setting of the listed hall. So you can see the buildings to the right and the left of the hall itself. London Square also took responsibility for the re-landscaping of Malvern Gardens, which you can see in this visualisation. So just to talk through the different components of the master plan, how they all fit together and how they come together to make this space work overall. First we have Toynbee Hall itself, so Grade 2 listed, and this was extended and refurbished by Richard Griffiths Architects, so we extended to the side and to the rear here. There's the Arts Admin Cafe, which is continued to be on site here. There's also surrounding sort of theatre buildings and primary school over here. In addition, as part of the Toynbee Hall sort of buildings, this is a new build mixed-use building at 28 Commercial Street, which we were involved with. So this was designed as a flexible mixed-use building with commercial space on the upper floors to provide long-term income for the charity. And then during the course of the project, it was decided that the Advice and Wellbeing Centre would be moved to the ground floor and basement of this building. So we're involved directly with Toynbee Hall with those elements of work, so into a detailed sort of fit out for that. To the other side of the site, this was the section which was taken on by London Square, so replacement housing along Wentworth Street to the north and Gunthorpe Street to the east. So this consisted of 63 units of high quality housing, 35% of which are affordable, and these are run by Peabody now. So the big thrust of the plan and the original project to refurbish and extend the halls was to make the entrance here more visible, to make the route there accessible and welcoming to the local community. So this was part of the works by Richard Griffiths and part of the extension, which we can see on this slide. So this is a new build element by them, which has some residential accommodation and further meeting rooms below. Internally, there's some reconfiguration of the hall to provide better circulation, and there's two kind of key grand halls within the space, which was refurbished, and these are sort of where community events take place and also sort of used for conference, largely for the charitable sector. So this was sort of refurbished and the water damage repaired and so on. So to the housing, which we did with London Square as our client, reforming that perimeter block with some high quality housing, aiming to get sort of good quality amenity space in, private amenity space, and doing dual aspect flats wherever possible. So this sort of forms of a new perimeter block, which was about knitting into the existing street scene, and sort of referencing the historic hall and the sort of varied character around there, which is sort of dominated by sort of Victorian warehouse buildings. Along Wentworth Street here, you can see on the north section of the site. So it's predominantly brick housing that we've done here, and an element of red sandstone just to form that transition from the retained facade of this red brick part of what was known as East College, and also just keeping the vertical rhythm going through, picking out elements of the roof gardens and winter gardens and balcony spaces with reconstituted stone, which picks up on some of the details of the hall and the Culpeper pub on the corner. And we've achieved an extra 2 stories on this section of the block, using cutouts and layering to just minimise the impact of the additional height on the street, and sort of knitting in really well with the general height and sort of character of the area. So we took quite sort of a playful approach to materials on this facade. The facade was part of the College East, which used to stretch along Wentworth Street. This was originally retained in the 1960s when the new housing block was built, and then we re-retained it as part of the new develop. And I think this is sort of part of the continuation of the heritage of the site, which was really important to the clients and to us, and how it knits into the master plan. So we felt it really important to retain these elements. And so to one side we've got the red sandstone, a darker brick forming a sort of recessive break, and then you can see the balcony and winter garden spaces behind the sort of colonnaded frontage and winter gardens within this block here. To Gunthorpe Street, to the east of site, which is a sort of quieter street, we went for a more sort of theatrical approach with deep overhangs and projecting balconies, so there'd be more interaction with the street where there's sort of limited natural overlooking. And again, we're replacing some rather tired buildings, again limited headroom, very poor condition, and the layouts were cramped, and it wouldn't really have been feasible to retain these and work with them. So this is the commercial building facing onto Commercial Street, which runs down here. So it's Commercial Street here. This is back as part of Toynbee Hall's buildings. So again, we sort of related this to the development as a whole with the sort of red bricks, slightly redder than the housing this time to relate more strongly to the Toynbee Hall, and using just sort of nice setbacks and layers of string courses and brick detailing, again to tie in with the sort of verticality of the historic Toynbee Hall, and to relate to the surrounding buildings. One element we've sort of made is sort of historical references, putting the arch on here, which echoes the arch which previously gave a route through from Commercial Street on the demolished buildings. And then this feeds into what the ground floor and basement are used for. These are part of the Toynbee Hall's Wellbeing and Advice Centre. So this route frames the entrance to Toynbee Hall. It's colonnaded to give that sort of collegiate feel to the entrance. Toynbee Hall's got a historic ties to the Oxbridge colleges, so it's a little nod to the quadrants and sort of cloistered routes found there. So the basement was reused from the previous building's basement, and ground floor has provided the Wellbeing Centre and a much more direct presence for the charity on the street, giving it a shop front and a very welcoming entrance, and something that's just that bit physically closer to the community, giving it a much stronger presence within the street. So the Advice and Wellbeing Centre split into across the 2 floors. At the entrance reception here, you can either go down to the Advice Centre or turn left into the Wellbeing Centre, which is designed as a sort of a flexible event space, so it can take quite high capacity. So the charity offers all sorts of things here, from craft workshops, movie nights, dancing, singing around the piano. So it's a sort of a very busy, well-used part of the estate as a whole. This has then the visual link onto Mallan Gardens in the external space. Down in the basement is the Advice Centre, and again this is sort of part of the heritage of Toynbee Hall. Very early on within their development, sort of back in the 19th century, they were providing free legal and financial advice to help disadvantaged people within the local community, and this is sort of key to alleviating the effects of poverty and lack of information. So we're involved again with detailed fit out of this. Sort of fairly limited budget, so we try to apply materials and with the maximum impact, and also sort of as part of the Advice Centre, it's key to sort of get the lighting and acoustics right. These sorts of things can turn a building unusable very quickly if they're not addressed. So even though it's a relatively small project, we brought in some consultants to help with these. So the light, with it being in a basement, will sort of go from a cold light during the day and then gradually warm towards sunset to give a sense of passing time when there's limited daylight down there. And then the other sort of key part of the master plan, which the Advice and Wellbeing Centre looks out onto, is Malham Gardens. So this was designed by Cameo and Partners, and also with the input of Muff Architecture, who did some public consultation. And the response from the local community was they didn't want an overly fussy public space. They wanted soft planting, green grass, and some seating, and this space opened up just as we went into lockdown and was incredibly important to the local community during that time. We visited sort of during lockdown when you're allowed to, and used these photos from around that time. So, you know, really nice touches, just like there being drinking water on site, and the table tennis table, which relates to the red brick of Toynbee Hall. And this has provided a real, you know, important space for socialising safely, activities, events, and exercise in an area of East London which doesn't have a huge amount of open green space. So I think this sort of, it's a master plan that has been very well realised. It's cohesive. Has enhanced the charity's physical and community presence in Spitalfields, whilst providing much needed new homes and commercial space, securing Toynbee Hall's long-term future and its role as an anchor in the local community to support local people to shape a fairer and happier future. Thank you.
So, Patrick, when we invited you to present this project, we were actually interested in the fact that a wellbeing centre was integral to the project brief. I think what's become apparent is that actually the whole project is very much about the relationship between placemaking, architectural expression and civic pride and indeed well-being. So is there a danger that our current focus on health and well-being means that we forget the very important role that traditional architectural skills can play in enriching everyday life?
Well, I think architecture has always been about health and well-being, and our role as an architect over the years and continues to be one of synthesizing a lot of data, complex briefs and requirements, but still sort of turning that into something, translating that into spaces that tell a story and uplift everyday life. I think it's great now. There's you know, there's this word well-being. It's given value, and it's being talked about, and all the data that's being generated now is just going to really help us sort of make more informed decisions. But as with anything, if you reduce it to a sort of tick box approach or sort of a simple list of technical requirements, then you're going to miss the point. So yes, I'm still very much into the kind of old school idea of sort of architect as a communicator of ideas, and that sort of continuation of history and place still being sort of incredibly valuable concepts.
And now if Emma, Ben and Flora can join me, we'll take a look at some of the questions that have been coming in from the audience. And Jason Sayer, who works with me at Architecture Today, has been looking at the questions as they come in. So, Jason, are there any particular issues that have been coming up again and again?
Hi, Isabel. Yeah, we actually have a question which goes, are we seeing any correlation with buildings that address health and well-being with property prices? You know, is this movement being reflected in the market?
Oh, okay. So, Emma, I'm going to put this to you. Interestingly, Flora, you touched on this, didn't you? And you said you were kind of sceptical about monetising social value, which I do understand your queasiness. But Emma, obviously, as a commercial developer, you must have some sense that the work that you're doing to improve well-being is, in the end, going to impact on property prices, commercial values. Can you talk about that a bit, please?
Sure. So look, I mentioned that we're a long-term owner of property. So for us, rising rents over time is what we're striving for. And I think the customer is becoming more discerning. I think as there is a lot of space out there, particularly post-COVID, there will be competition for the best space. And I think, perversely, not necessarily COVID, but certainly the energy crisis that's perhaps more recently impacting all of us, both professionally but also personally. Those sort of accreditations and the small print behind the product you're buying, in terms of the cost of running it, what went into making it, what's its story. I think people will become more demanding, and ultimately one hopes that will flow through to value. Not seeing it yet, but I think it's just the tip of what we might see to come.
And Flora, do you want to respond to that at all? Obviously Emma has to work in a sense in predictions, whereas you're very much trying to work in gathering data on what has occurred. Do you think Emma's predictions are accurate?
I think they're spot on. And after all, we try and gather data about what's happening now in order to be able to predict the future, or attempt to predict the future in some way. I think people are becoming much more discerning. I think there's going to be a conflation of the health agenda with planning that's going to start really. It's already happening in Wales and Scotland, and it's really going to start coming forth. And I'm no expert in this field, but I'm told that developers are getting very interested in ESG, environmental social governance, because they're actually getting a better deal for borrowing money and etc. When planning projects, and so it's starting to make good commercial sense for them as well. It seems very clear. If you're going to live somewhere that's going to be good for your health and well-being, and all of these. The research shows that healthy places are innovative places, they're bustling places, they're financially viable places. Why wouldn't you want to live there?
Why indeed. Jason, what other questions do we have?
Sure. Are there any thermal benefits to having the false ceiling with the ISO mount Type 2?
Well, I'll put that to bed. It'd be perverse to put it to anybody else.
I can deal with that one. Yes, there are. So if obviously you've got some thermal insulation in the void, and so you're going to stop your heat disappearing upstairs and heating somebody else's flat. So it means their bills are going to go up, but yours are going to go down. So we in the presentation I mentioned using the acoustic rock wool, the RW45, but if you were to use the other product that we mentioned, the cell bar loose fill, that actually fills up the whole void, and that's incredible thermally.
Thank you very much for that, Jason. We've only got time for one more question. Do you have any questions for Patrick?
Yes, actually. What is the difference between a modern day wellbeing centre and a good old fashioned community centre or village hall?
Ooh, Patrick, what is the difference?
Well, probably not a huge amount. It's just probably better designed to cope with the requirements. So yeah, a lot of church hall-like activities do take place there. There's sort of singing, there's dance workshops, there's movie nights, there's all that sort of stuff. But technically, the space is going to work a whole lot better. It can service really dense, sort of densely occupied events. So if you've got to do all the air changes for 100 people in the space, then that's sort of there to cope with it. So it's all the acoustics and lighting have been thought through, so it really works, and hopefully won't be as cold and drafty as your church hall.
Brilliant, thank you. That's all we've got time for part 3. So before we conclude, I'd like to thank content partners Oscar Acoustics and our speakers, Emma Cariaga from British Land, Ben Hancock from Oscar Acoustics, Flora Samuel from the University of Reading, and Patrick Michel from Platform 5 Architects.